The chief's terms were simple and absolute. Marry my daughter, or leave this valley and never come back. There was just one detail nobody in 3 days of riding had warned Wyatt Carlson about. Nobody in the whole territory had seen that woman's face in 5 years. She wore a white veil from dawn until she slept, and the story going around said she was the plainest, most unfortunate woman anyone in the valley had ever laid eyes on. Was it true? Was there something worse underneath? Or was her father hiding a reason of his own? Settle in, because when that veil finally came off, what Wyatt saw wasn't ugliness at all. It was something that stopped the whole gathering cold. Chief Soren studied Wyatt without blinking. Marry my daughter, or leave this land and don't return. Wyatt, who'd ridden into the encampment less than an hour before hoping to buy a stretch of river bottom, felt the ground shift under him. Marriage, he'd come for dirt and water rights, nothing more. I don't follow, Wyatt said slowly, pulling his hat off. I came here to do business. Not to find a wife. Soren crossed his arms, silver braids catching the afternoon light, old scars telling stories Wyatt would never hear the details of. This land isn't sold to strangers. But if you join this family, if you become one of us, the land is yours outright. Wyatt looked around at the camp. He'd spent 3 hard days crossing open desert to get here. Back in town, they'd warned him plainly, don't ride out that way, that ground belongs to the Stillwater people, and men who go looking for a deal with them don't come back the same. He hadn't listened. 5 years he'd spent looking for a patch of earth to call his, working other men's cattle, sleeping under open sky with nothing over his head but stars. And now here was a chief handing him exactly what he'd been chasing, with a condition that turned the whole thing sideways. Your daughter, Wyatt said carefully. Might I meet her first? Soren shook his head, something unreadable moving behind his dark eyes. She doesn't speak to strangers. She wears the veil, always has these 5 years. You want to know why? Because she's plain to look at, the plainest woman in this whole camp. That's why no man's asked for her. That's why she covers her face day and night and doesn't stop. The warriors standing nearby looked away, uncomfortable. A few women working close by lowered their voices to a murmur. Wyatt felt something tighten in his stomach. He'd ridden out here for land, not a wife, and certainly not a wife he'd never once laid eyes on. With respect, Chief, Wyatt tried, I only came for the land. I wasn't looking to marry anybody. Then go now, Soren cut him off flat and final, and don't come back. My men will see to it you keep your distance. It wasn't quite a threat. It also wasn't anything less than one. Wyatt glanced at the 3 warriors who'd escorted him in, their spear tips catching the sun, and understood plainly he wasn't in any position to argue terms. Why me? Wyatt asked instead. Why offer this to a stranger you've known an hour? Soren let out a long breath, and for just a moment something different crossed his face. Weariness, maybe. Or something closer to a father's private grief. Because my daughter deserves a chance at a life. 5 years she's lived hidden, turned away, called things by people who have never once spoken to her. He paused. And because you're the first man in a long while who rode in here without fear in his eyes, and without a lie in his mouth either, that tells me something. Wyatt turned his hat over in his hands. Whatever he said next would decide the rest of his life, one way or the other. He thought about the years of drifting, the cold nights wondering if he'd ever have 4 walls of his own to come back to. When would the ceremony be? He finally asked. A ripple went through the gathered warriors. Soren's eyebrow rose. 3 days from now, the chief said. At sundown. Then I accept. The words were out of Wyatt's mouth before he'd fully thought them through, and there was no calling them back once they'd landed. If you've ever said yes to something before your head caught up to your heart, you already know exactly where Wyatt stood in that moment. And I'd love to hear in the comments whether you think he made the right call. Because what happens over these next 3 days changes absolutely everything He thought he understood. The warriors began talking low among themselves. One of the older men shook his head, as if he just watched a stranger walk straight into a mistake. "Very well," Soren said. "We'll give you a tent for these 3 days. Get yourself ready, rider. Your life's about to look very different." A young warrior led Wyatt toward a small tent at the edge of camp. And along the way, Wyatt took in the place properly. Hide tents marked with painted symbols, cookfires trailing smoke into a darkening sky, children chasing each other between the rocks. And then he saw her. A single still figure stood beside a distant tent, wrapped head to ground in white cloth. Nothing of her showed through it, not a hand, not a shape, nothing but the veil itself moving faintly in the evening wind. "Wren," the young warrior said quietly, nodding toward her. She didn't move. But Wyatt felt her attention on him anyway, watching, weighing him from behind that veil. He stood a moment, wanting to raise a hand, say something, show he wasn't afraid of whatever was under there, but nothing came out. The warrior touched his shoulder gently. "Come. Your tent's this way." Wyatt followed, glancing back once more at the white shape standing motionless among the tents. What was under that veil? Was she really as plain as the chief claimed, or was there something else entirely going on here? The sun kept sinking toward the ridgeline, painting the whole valley red and orange. In 3 days that veil would come off. In 3 days he'd finally know. He sat down inside his assigned tent on a pile of hides and touched the small purse of coins still on his belt. He'd ridden out here to buy land with money. Instead, he was about to buy it with a marriage, to a woman he'd never seen, a woman the whole camp called plain beyond redemption, a woman wrapped in more mystery than Wyatt knew what to do with. He closed his eyes and breath slow. There was no walking this back now. He'd given his word, and a man who broke his word wasn't much of a man at all. But underneath the nerves, he felt something else stirring too. Not quite fear, something closer to anticipation. Whatever that veil was hiding, in 3 days he'd finally see it. Word traveled fast once he rode back into Sundown Wells for supplies. "Did you hear? That new rider's marrying into the Stillwater camp." "Which one?" "Soren's daughter, the one who never takes the veil off." That woman's. Wyatt barely got both boots on the ground outside the general store before he felt every eye on the street land on him. The storekeeper, a heavy-set man named Bertram Coyle, stared at him wide-eyed. "It's true then. You're marrying the chief's girl." "It's true," Wyatt said, sorting through shirts on the counter. Coyle let out a low whistle. "You're out of your mind, son, plumb out of your mind." "Why's that?" "Because nobody's laid eyes on that woman in years. Wears that veil morning and night. Word is her face is something terrible. That's why she hides it." Wyatt paid for the shirts without answering. He wasn't about to argue with a man who'd never once spoken to Wren himself. Outside, a knot of men had gathered, and among them was Cal Whitmore, a cowhand Wyatt had ridden with the year before on a spread near the border. Cal had a bottle in one hand and a flush across his face. "Wyatt, get over here, we need to talk." Wyatt walked over, tying his purchases behind his saddle. "Didn't know you were in this town, Cal. Month now, working the Dunmore place." Cal grabbed his arm. "Heard what you're fixing to do." "Tell me it's a lie." "It's not. You're crazy." Cal shook his head. "You know what they say about that woman. That every man who gets close to her ends up with bad luck trailing him after." "Stories," Wyatt said, easing his arm free. "Stories, my foot." Another man cut in. 3 years back, a trader tried doing business with that camp. Got too close to her once. Week later, his whole wagon overturned, lost every bit of stock he had. "Coincidence," Wyatt said. "And the hunter who saw her by the river by accident," a third man added. "Broke his leg the very next day. Couldn't work for half a year." Wyatt looked around at the lot of them. Grown men spooked by their own shadows. "I don't put stock in curses." Cal stepped in closer, dropping his voice. "Look, I know you, you're a decent sort. You deserve better than marrying a woman you've never even seen, a woman her own father calls plain. The land he's offering is good land, Wyatt said. It's my shot at having something that's actually mine. There's other land, other chances. Cal wasn't backing off. You don't have to do this. Come work the Dunmore spread with me. They're always short good hands. For a moment Wyatt hesitated, looking around at the dusty street, the faces watching him with pity or amusement. The wide, clean sky stretching over the distant hills. Was he making a mistake? But then he pictured that still white shape standing alone among the tents, and he remembered Soren's words, "My daughter deserves a chance." And he remembered something else, too, every one of those years wandering without a place that was really his. "I've already given my word," he said. "Ceremonies in 2 days." Cal blew out a long breath. "Nothing I say is going to change your mind, is it?" The rest of the men drifted off shaking their heads. Only Cal stayed behind. "If you're really doing this," he said, quieter now, more serious, "at least be good to her. Those people don't forgive easy if their customs get disrespected. And that woman, plain or not. Whatever's really under that veil, nobody deserves to spend their whole life being turned away before anyone's even looked at them properly." The words caught Wyatt off guard, coming from a man who minutes earlier had been trying to talk him out of the whole thing. "I intend to," Wyatt said. Cal clapped him on the shoulder. "Good luck, then. You'll need it." Wyatt rode back out alone as the light started to fail, the trail winding between red rock and scattered brush. He turned over everything he'd heard, the curses, the warnings, the superstition passed hand to hand like a bad coin. But nobody in that whole town had asked the one question that actually mattered. Nobody had wondered what it might be like to live behind a veil for 5 straight years, turned away by people who'd never once bothered to know you. By the time he reached the camp, the fires were already lit and the smell of cooking hung in the air. Children ran laughing between the tents. And there, in the same spot as the evening before, stood the white shape, still and silent, watching. Wyatt dismounted and walked slowly toward her, stopping a respectful few paces off. "Evening," he said simply. She didn't answer, didn't move. "I expect you'd rather not talk to a stranger," he went on, "and that's fair enough. I only wanted you to know that in 2 days we'll be married, and I give you my word I mean to treat you right." The veil stirred faintly in the breeze. For a long moment nothing happened at all. Then, barely enough to catch, she nodded once. It wasn't much, but it was the first thing that had passed between them, and it mattered. Wyatt walked back to his tent with an odd feeling sitting in his chest. In 2 days that veil would come off, and whatever waited underneath it, there'd be no going back from there. The night before the wedding, the whole camp stayed busy well past dark. Women prepared food, men tuned drums, children ran wild between the fires. A marriage was always an occasion, even one as strange as this. Wyatt couldn't sleep. He'd tried for hours, but his mind wouldn't quiet down. Tomorrow he'd marry a woman he'd never seen. Tomorrow his whole life would look different. He got up and walked. The desert night was cold and sharp, stars scattered thick overhead, the cookfires burned down to soft red coals. He wandered toward the horse line. The camp's animals were something to see, mustangs gentled with patience, paints marked in perfect color, strong, quick mares. The pride of the whole camp, worth more to them than any coin. Wyatt leaned against the fence rail and watched them sleep, his own horse mixed in among the rest, looking settled enough. Then he heard it, a soft crunch, the kind of sound a careful man makes when he's trying hard not to be heard and not quite managing it. He went still, listening. It came again, off toward the dark end of the corral. He moved without a sound, sticking to shadow, years of handling cattle having taught him to move slow and quiet when it counted. 3 men crouched at the far fence, working at the ropes holding the horses in. Wide hats, bandanas pulled up over their faces. Thieves. Wyatt's pulse kicked up. He needed to move fast and smart both. Shout now and they might bolt in the confusion. Rush them alone and it was 3 against 1. He crouched, gathered a handful of stones from the ground, and circled wide until he came up behind them. "Evening, gentlemen," he said, loud and even. All 3 spun around. "Who the hell are you?" one growled. "Someone with a problem with horse thieves," Wyatt said. The biggest of them stepped forward. "Get gone, cowboy, not your fight." "Actually, it is. Those horses belong to my family near enough." The men traded a glance. The big one laughed. "Marrying in, are you, to this lot?" "That's right," Wyatt said. "And I'm not standing by while you rob them the week I join." "Then you're dumber than you look," the big one said and lunged. Wyatt sidestepped the first swing and threw a stone that caught the man square in the temple, staggering him. The second thief rushed in and Wyatt turned his elbow into the man's gut, doubling him over with a groan. The third hung back, sizing things up leaner, likely faster than the other 2. 2 on 1 now, he said. "Don't care for those odds much, do you?" But the big one had already recovered, charging like a spooked bull. Wyatt waited until the last second and stepped clear, and the man plowed straight into his thin partner, both of them going down tangled in the dirt. The second thief tried to rise. Wyatt shoved him back down and pulled the bandana off his face. Guards, thieves at the corral. Tents lit up all across the camp. Warriors came running, half-dressed, some already carrying spears. The 3 thieves made a break for it, but they were surrounded within seconds, and 3 spear points at his throat convinced the big one to think better of resisting. Soren arrived moments later, a blanket over his shoulders, and took in the scene fast. "What happened here?" "They were cutting the corral ropes," Wyatt said, nodding at the 3 men on the ground. "Caught them at it." A young warrior checked the fence line. "It's true, Chief. Ropes are cut clean through. These men came to steal." Soren studied Wyatt a long moment, then unexpectedly put a hand on his shoulder. "You saved our horses. You saved the pride of this camp." "Only did what needed doing," Wyatt said. "Plenty of men wouldn't have risked their neck for horses that weren't yet theirs," the chief said, and something in his voice had shifted toward genuine respect. "You did." Around them the warriors murmured among themselves. One of the eldest, a man with a face carved by more winters than Wyatt could guess at, spoke quietly to Soren, who nodded along. "Old Yarrow says the spirits walked with you tonight," the chief translated. "Says you've proven yourself worthy of joining this family." Wyatt didn't quite know what to say to that. He hadn't done anything he'd call extraordinary. He'd only stood up for what needed standing up for. Somewhere in the gathered crowd he caught sight of a familiar white shape in the torchlight, Wren, watching. He couldn't see her face, but something in the way she held herself seemed different now. Less rigid, less far away. The warriors marched the thieves off with a plain warning never to return. Slowly the camp settled back toward quiet, but something had shifted. Walking back to his tent, Wyatt noticed the warriors nodding to him as he passed. Children looked at him with something like admiration. He wasn't just the stranger come to marry the chief's overlooked daughter anymore. He was the man who'd stood between the camp and a theft in the middle of the night. Before ducking into his tent, he looked once more toward where Wren had been standing. She was already gone, slipped away like something imagined. Tomorrow was the ceremony. Tomorrow the veil would finally come off. But tonight, Wyatt had already earned something worth more than land. He'd earned trust. Sundown painted the whole valley orange and violet when the ceremony began. Wyatt stood at the center of camp in a clean shirt bought special in town, his heart going harder than he'd have liked to admit. The whole community had gathered around the central fire. Drums started up, a steady pulse that seemed to rise straight out of the ground itself, and the women's voices lifted in song above it. Soren stood before Wyatt in his finest ceremonial dress, feathers woven through his hair, paint marking his face. "Today," he announced, loud enough to carry to every corner of the gathering, "an outsider becomes family, A stranger becomes kin. This man has shown courage. He has shown honor. He is worthy to stand among us. The warriors struck the ground with the butts of their spears in approval, the sound rolling out like distant thunder. Then she came. Ren walked slowly between the tents, flanked by two older women, the white veil covering her completely from crown to hem. She moved with real grace, though Wyatt could sense the nerves running under every careful step. The whole camp fell quiet. Only the drums kept going. She stopped in front of him, close enough now that he could see the veil shift faintly with her breath. It was the nearest they'd ever stood to each other. Soren lifted his hand skyward. The sun stands witness. The earth stands witness. He looked between his daughter and the man about to become her husband. May this joining bring good to them both. One of the elders came forward with a bowl of smoking herbs, sweet and earthy, and passed the smoke first around Wyatt, then around Ren. Another elder tied a length of red cord around Wyatt's wrist, then Ren's, binding the two loosely together. What's tied here isn't meant to come apart, Soren said. The drums picked up their pace. The singing rose higher. Sparks lifted off the fire into the darkening sky. Then the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. Soren looked at his daughter, and for the first time since Wyatt had met him, something plainly emotional crossed the chief's face. Not hardness this time, but something gentler. Relief, maybe. Or a father's love finally let out into the open. The time has come, Soren said, his voice softer now. The veil comes off. The silence that followed was total. Even the drums stopped. 200 people held their breath at once. Soren stepped close to his daughter and took the edges of the veil gently in both hands. Wyatt felt his stomach drop. What was he about to see? He began lifting it slowly. Bare feet came into view first, then legs in a beautifully worked buckskin dress, then small, careful hands. Higher still her throat, her chin, and then the veil came away entirely. Wyatt forgot to breathe. Ren wasn't plain. She wasn't even simply pretty. She was extraordinary, high, delicate cheekbones, a straight nose, lips that curved even in her nervousness. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. One was deep brown, warm as turned earth after rain. The other was pale blue, bright as noon sky in summer, two different colors entirely. Wyatt had heard of such a thing before but never once seen it with his own eyes. The camp broke into low murmurs all around them. Some of the warriors looked startled. Women whispered behind their hands. Children pointed with open curiosity. But Wyatt couldn't look away, and it wasn't horror keeping his eyes on her. It was something closer to wonder. Ren looked straight at him, and in those two mismatched eyes he saw plain fear. Fear of rejection all over again. Fear of watching disgust settle onto his face the way she'd clearly seen it settle onto others before. It never came. "You're beautiful," he said, quiet, meant only for her. Her eyes went wide with surprise, like she couldn't quite trust what she'd heard. "Your eyes," he went on, searching for the words, "they're like sunrise and sunset happening at the same time." A tear slid down her cheek. Then another, but Wyatt could see plainly they weren't tears of sorrow. Soren watched the whole exchange with a grave expression, then spoke, his voice carrying out over the hushed gathering. "My daughter was born this way. Some in this camp called it ill luck, said the spirits couldn't decide what color to give her and left the mistake behind for her to carry." His voice caught slightly. "I let people call her plain. I put that veil on her, but it was never because she was hard to look at." He paused. "It was because I knew men would come from outside. Men who'd see her beauty and want to take her for all the wrong reasons. Men who'd never once look past her face to what was underneath it. I needed to find one man who'd agree to marry her without knowing what she looked like at all. A man who'd choose her on nothing but honor." He looked straight at Wyatt. "And I found him." Wyatt felt the full weight of those words land. The whole thing had been a test from the start. The ultimatum, the talk of her being plain, the veil, All of it built to find someone who'd accept Wren for who she actually was, long before ever seeing her face. Wren stepped toward him, her voice soft as wind moving through dry grass when she finally spoke to him plainly for the first time. "My eyes truly don't trouble you." Wyatt took her hand gently. "Your eyes are the most beautiful thing I've ever come across in my life." She smiled, small, careful, like a smile she wasn't fully used to wearing, and it lit her whole face regardless. The drums started again, joyful this time. The women singing rose with them. Children ran laughing around the fire. Soren raised both hands. "It is done. Wyatt and Wren are husband and wife." The whole camp broke into celebration at once. The festivities carried on well into the night. Drums never let up. Women danced circles around the fire. Men swapped stories of home and old battles. And through all of it, Wyatt found he could barely keep his mind on the noise around him. Too much of the night was still settling into place. Wren sat beside him, watching the celebration with a small, private smile. The veil was gone now, her dark hair loose over her shoulders. Every time someone passed too close, she still lowered her eyes out of old habit. "You don't have to hide anymore," Wyatt told her quietly. She looked at him with those two impossible eyes. "It's hard to just stop. 5 years, that veil was my whole world." "Why 5 years exactly?" she sighed. "When I turned 15, men started coming around. Traders, hunters, men just passing through. They all looked at me the same strange way. My father noticed." "Noticed what?" "That they wanted to take me. One offered 20 horses for me. Another offered gold. None of them cared who I actually was, they just wanted to own something they decided was beautiful." Her voice firmed up. "My father was furious. Said no man would have me who only saw my face." Wyatt was starting to understand the shape of Soren's reasoning. "So he told everyone you were plain instead. He put the veil on me and let the talk spread on its own. The chief's daughter, the plainest woman in the whole camp. Men stopped coming. Stopped looking." She touched her own cheek lightly. "After a while, I started half believing it myself. Started thinking maybe there really was something wrong with eyes that didn't match." "There's nothing wrong with them," Wyatt said firmly. "They're rare." "That's a different thing entirely." She smiled, a little sadly this time. "My mother used to say something close to that. She passed 3 years back. Said I've been given something most people never get, a way of noticing things other folks walked right past." "And do you notice things?" Wren looked at him steadily. "I notice hearts mostly. And yours is a good one, Wyatt. I knew that the first evening you rode in." Just then an older woman approached and settled down near them with some effort, joints creaking audibly. It was the same elder who'd carried the smoking bowl during the ceremony. "May I speak with you both a moment?" she said, her accent unhurried and warm. "Of course," Wyatt said. "I don't believe I caught your name." "Yarrow," she said. "I keep the old stories here, and I look after the sick when they need looking after." She looked at Wren with plain affection. "This girl's always been something special. When she was born with eyes of 2 colors, plenty had opinions about what it meant. Some called it bad luck. Just as many called it the opposite, a mark that she noticed things other folks missed entirely. Old talk mostly, passed hand to hand until nobody quite remembered where it started. But it was enough to make a careful father cautious." "You never told me any of that, Yarrow," Wren said, "because your father asked me not to. He worried the wrong kind of person might hear the talk and decide you were worth chasing down for it, rather than for yourself." Yarrow turned her gaze on Wyatt. "Your father is a wise man, girl. He knew you needed someone who'd accept you plainly, not for beauty, not for old talk about what your eyes might mean, but for honor and for heart." She studied Wyatt a moment longer. "And you, Ryder, you passed that test the moment you agreed to marry a woman you'd never seen. You proved the rest of it tonight at that corral, expecting nothing back for it." Wyatt felt oddly humbled by that. "I only did what seemed right." That's precisely what makes a decent man, Yarrow said, rising slowly. I'll tell you one more thing before I leave you two in peace. I dreamed of a rider coming in from the east, some nights back, before you ever showed up at our gate. I had a feeling his coming would mean something good for this family. With that, she shuffled off into the dark, leaving the two of them alone, with the noise of the celebration still going strong around them. The quiet between them afterward was an easy one. Are you frightened, Wren asked after a while, of what marrying someone different? Someone folks talk about strangely. She waited for his answer. I've spent my whole life feeling like the odd one out, Wyatt said finally. No family, no place that was really mine, always hunting for somewhere to belong. So no, I'm not frightened of somebody different. If anything, I expect that's why the two of us understand each other so well. Wren took his hand, her fingers soft but sure. My father's giving you the land he promised. Good ground close to the river, we could build there. Would you want that? Wyatt asked. Living apart from the camp instead of staying here. I want to live somewhere I can just be myself. No veil, no hiding. Her eyes caught the firelight. And I want to be with someone who actually sees me, not the story everyone else decided to believe about me. Soren joined them not long after. His usual grave expression gone soft with something close to happiness. Wyatt, he said, settling beside them, I owe you my thanks. For what exactly? For giving my daughter something I couldn't manage in 5 years of trying. Freedom to simply be who she is. He looked at Wren with plain tenderness. I told myself the veil was protecting her. Truth is, I was only keeping a bird from learning to fly. Wren leaned into her father and hugged him. You did what you thought was right. And in the end, you found me the right man to trust with the rest of it. Soren smiled, warm and unguarded. Tomorrow I'll walk you both out to the land myself. It's yours now, Wyatt, that and my blessing besides. He rose and returned to the celebration, leaving them together again. Wyatt looked up at the sky, thick with stars and no moon to dim them, and thought about the whole long road that had brought him here, years of drifting, of loneliness, of searching for something he couldn't quite name. And now, at last, he'd found more than a stretch of river land. He'd found a home. He'd found people who'd take him in. He'd found someone who saw him plainly, the same way he was already learning to see her. Wren rested her head against his shoulder. What are you thinking about? That I rode out here looking for land, Wyatt said honestly, and I ended up finding something worth a great deal more. She looked up, her two different eyes catching the firelight and the stars both at once. Same, she said softly. And there, while the celebration carried on and the desert settled around them the way it always had, long before either of them arrived, Wyatt knew plainly he'd made the right choice. The chief's ultimatum hadn't been the trap it first looked like. It had been the start of something worth every mile it took to get there. If you stuck around to the end, thank you for spending this evening out on the Stillwater grounds with Wyatt and Wren. Tell me down in the comments where you're tuning in from tonight, and whether you'd have said yes the way Wyatt did, not knowing what waited behind that veil. A like helps stories like this one find their way to the next person who needs a little company tonight. Until next time, ride easy.